Hello, class, and welcome to Lesson 6, Lecture 2 on editing. So, in our previous lecture, we talked about different kinds of cuts, the basic strategy and purpose of editing. So, in our last lecture, we talked about cuts, and we looked at the different kinds of cuts and shot transitions. And we talked about the basic strategy of editing and the basic purpose of editing. How is it used in the overall formal system of a motion picture to create narrative? So, in this lecture, we're going to talk about kinds of shot relations. How are shots related to one another when they're put together? Well, there are four basic principles by which to connect shots. First is graphic, based on a shot's composition. The second is rhythmic, based on the shot's length. Spatial, based on the relationship of space between two shots. And temporal, based on the relationship of time. So let's go through now and break those down and give you some examples. So graphic editing is based on what's in the image. We know that shots at their most basic are images. And graphics may be edited to achieve smooth continuity or abrupt contrast. Graphic editing permits the interaction through similarity and difference of the purely pictorial qualities of shots. The filmmakers may link shots by graphic similarities, thus making what we call a graphic match. Shapes, colors, overall composition, and movement in shot A may be picked up in shot B. And approximate graphic continuity from shot A to shot B is typical of most cinema. And here's an example. In shot A, the kid has the bat behind him. In shot B, he's swinging the bat. On the right side, shot A, got a guy at the top of the frame running with a gun, and in the bottom shot, he's jumping with a gun, right? And so this is basically how motion pictures unfold, through graphic similarities. Otherwise, things would be very confusing. We wouldn't have any idea what was going on. So you can see the different ways that the shots are matched. Through composition. In other words, how objects and figures are arranged within the shots. They're basically similar. You have a long shot, and the first two pictures, you have a medium long shot and a second. Colors, right? The colors are similar. Lighting. In our second two pictures, we have an overexposed background, right? The figure is centered in both shots. So this is what a graphic match is. It's pretty simple, and again, it's very common. Now, you could have a purposely unmatched shots, right, to give us some kind of contrast. But for the most part, shots are matched. So you can watch a video linked to the course site, creative match cut examples, to give you an idea and some examples of how match cuts work within the flow of the film. So that's graphic relations. Next is rhythmic relations, and we can get an idea of what that means by looking at the root word rhythm. Rhythm has to do with sound and music. That's how we often associate it, right? Or rhythm has to do with consistency. When you say you're in a rhythm, it means that you're moving along with consistent functionality, right? And whatever you're doing. So with rhythmic relations, each shot has a certain length that corresponds to a measurable duration on screen. We talked about this. A shot can be as short as 1 frame, a millisecond, or 1,000 frames, 10 minutes or longer. Traditionally, shots could only be 9 minutes long because that was the length of a reel of film when movies were shot and projected on film. But now, of course, a shot can be as long as you want it because you can shoot it digitally. So editing allows the filmmaker to control the duration of the shot. When she adjusts the length of shots in relation to each other, she controls the rhythm of the editing. And so you might want to shorten the duration of shots in an action scene to create a sense of speed, right? Or a dancing sequence, something like that. And you might want to have longer shots during, say, two characters talking while one of them is on their deathbed, right? To give a sense that time is slowing down. So this is how rhythmic relations work. And again, we have a video here you can watch that I have linked to the course. Okay, moving on. Spatial relations. Editing serves to control not only graphics and rhythm, but also to construct film space. That is, editing permits the filmmaker to juxtapose any 2 points in space and thus apply relations between them. The director might, for instance, start with a shot that establishes a spatial whole and follow this with a shot of a part of this space to give us an idea that we've gone inside. Right? That's a standard establishing shot, which we'll talk about in the next lecture. And anytime you watch the sitcom, you get an idea of this because they always have a start with a shot of the house or wherever they're at, the bar or the hospital, and then the next shot is inside, right? So it's implying a relationship between those two spaces. And over time, we've learned the language of visual storytelling, so that we understand, based on our experience of having seen many establishing shots, what those relations mean. Alternately, the filmmaker could construct a whole space out of component parts, so you don't have an establishing shot. The possibility of such spatial manipulation was examined by the Soviet filmmaker Lev Kuleshov, who conducted experiments during the 1920s by assembling shots with separate dramatic elements. So he famously would put two shots together. Say one would be a portrait of a man, and the next would be a portrait of, a murder, and he would see that the viewer, by associating those two shots without any other context, would blame the murder on that man, right? He would be associated with evil and crime. Whereas if you took the exact same shot of the man and put it with, say, a sleeping baby, then the association would be made that he was a good parent or something like that. So basically using shots to create connections in our mind. And the other thing about constructing a whole space out of component parts, it allows for suspense. So if you open on a character inside of a dark place and we don't know where they are, we haven't been given an establishing shot yet, right? Then we can slowly start to put together an idea of what's going on in the scene through the association of different shots. So that's the Kuleshov effect. In the absence of an establishing shot, the viewer is prompted to infer a spatial whole on the basis of seeing only portions of the space. So another really important example of spatial manipulation is this idea of cross-cutting. very, very common in movies and especially television. It's also called parallel editing. This is when we see simultaneous actions in different spaces, and those spaces are linked, right? Cause and effects relationship between actions in two or more settings. So that might be, for example, at the end of Return of the Jedi, you have Luke Skywalker on the Death Star, right, fighting Darth Vader, while on the planet below, the rebels are fighting the Imperial troops in the forest, and then we have a third space, which is the space battle that's going on. So it's three different actions in three different spaces, but because of the way they're linked, the way that they're cut together, we understand that they're occurring basically at the same time, right? That's why it's called parallel action. And cross-cutting implies an unrestricted range of knowledge, an omniscient viewpoint, which means that we as the viewer can see everywhere. We kind of have a God's eye view of everything that's going on. And a very famous example of cross-cutting is in The Godfather. And in the climax of The Godfather, there is a baptism for Michael Corleone's son. Michael Corleone being the character here. He's the godfather of the family. He's taking over the family from his father, who has recently died. And so we have the peace and the serenity of the church and the innocence of the newborn child as he's baptized, and all of the family element. And then Coppola contrasts that with a number of murders around town that Michael has ordered. Assassinations of his fellow gangsters, his rival gangsters. So it's meant to be ironic, right? Giving us a portrait of this man who claims to be a family man, but is really a murderer. And then our final relation is temporal relation. Like other film techniques, editing can control the time of the action, right? In a narrative film, especially, editing usually contributes to a plot's manipulation of story time. In fact, it almost always does. Because films do not unfold in real time, right? Time is always elided, which means that we jump forward in time, we jump backward in time. And a very simple example would be somebody gets in their car and drives to the store. We don't see them drive all the way to the store and stop at the lights and all that, because that would be horrible. It would be boring, right? It would ruin the pace of the story. So what do we see instead? We get a cut to the driver pulling into the parking lot, and that gives us an idea through the connection of those two shots that he's driven to the store, right? We understand that time is supposed to have passed. And of course, flashbacks, which are very common in movies and TV, and flash forwards, not as common, but they're still used, are another way to manipulate time. And of course, we can think of many, many flashbacks in movies like Citizen Kane, Stand By Me, The Terminator, right? Okay, so that is the end of part 2. Make sure that you watch the videos that are connected to the lesson for lecture 2, and then go on and watch part 3 of editing.